Hi. This video is going to contain everything you'd expect from a comprehensive Yinlin guide, including discussions on Moonlit versus Void Thunder, weapon options, and the value of a resonance chain. So if you're interested in any of these in particular, please use the timestamps, as I'd like to first dive into the most misunderstood part of her kit, which is her core rotation. And really, it's the game's fault for not explaining things clearly. So let's get into it. Yinlin's core rotation revolves around her 2 skill casts and her 2 inherent passives. Before we take the field with Yinlin though, it's highly recommended to have her intro available, not only because it applies the Sinner's Mark to enemies in a decent radius, but also because it helps her tremendously in managing her forte gauge and condensing her rotation. Following her intro, the first thing we want to do is cast her skill 1 to activate a bunch of buffs. 15% crit rate from Yinlin's first passive, 15% electro damage if you're on Void Thunder, and both weapon stacks if you're on String Master. Skill 1 also puts us in execution mode, which grants us 4 stacks of electromagnetic blast that we get to spend on our following attacks. You'll notice a color shift in the Sinner's Marks from purple to red, implying that you still have electromagnetic blasts available. Once all are used up, the marks go back to their original color. Now, nothing in the in-game descriptions would suggest that these red marks no longer count as Sinner's Marks, but thanks to some of your comments and by doing some testing, we can confirm that Yinlin's second inherent passive only works on enemies with the purple Sinner's Mark. In practice, this means that if we simply cast Skill 1 and Skill 2 in succession, Skill 2 neither deals more damage, nor does it give us our 10% attack buff, because the enemies are marked red. We have to deplete all 4 electromagnetic blasts first, and then use our Skill 2 to reap the benefits. So how do we do that? According to the ability description, we're supposed to do 4 basic attacks, because each basic can only trigger 1 electromagnetic blast. This takes a while to do due to long animations, but it might be the most straightforward and practical way to do this, especially on mobile. However, we're fighting an uphill battle against faulty or incomplete in-game descriptions here, and this one is no exception. Electromagnetic blasts do in fact also trigger on your ultimate and heavy attacks. This allows us to shorten our rotation. One thing you can do is cancel your 3rd basic attack into a heavy attack, and with a bit of practice you can get both attacks to come out at almost the same time. Once this becomes muscle memory, it's a great way to get rid of all 4 blasts while generating a large chunk of concerto and forte gauge. If the situation doesn't allow for this combo, you can of course also just do basics 1 and 2, dash or do something else and repeat, or simply do basics 1 through 4. As mentioned earlier, your ultimate also takes off 1 stack, so whether you do cast your ultimate within this window or not, going all the way to your 4th basic attack is not required in either case. The second skill cast can be swap cancelled entirely, and there's some incentive to do so as the animation is rather long, and you can benefit from the off-field attack bonus on String Master, but I would only consider this in single target encounters. Against groups of enemies, there are 2 reasons why you don't want to swap cancel here. The first reason is that if you swap out now, enemies lose all applied Sinner's Marks, and chances are you won't be able to reapply them to all targets before you go into your forte heavy attack to turn them into punishment marks. The second reason is that you'll more than likely lose your outro buff. The rate at which Yinlin generates concerto energy is proportional to the number of enemies you're fighting, because electromagnetic blasts generate concerto per hit, but also per target. In this clip you can see that even if I wanted to swap here, I would just waste my outro buff on some low DPS warm-up rotation on Calcharo and ruin my entire run. Against a single boss you can safely get away with swapping here, since your concerto won't be full at this point in the rotation just yet, and there's only 1 Sinner's Mark to reapply, so if you have something useful to do on one of your other units, you can consider it as an optional optimization. Even if you remain on the field though, there are things you can do to make skill 2 feel less clunky. The instant the puppet lands on the floor, you can dash out of the animation, you can cancel it with your ultimate, you can also cancel it with an echo, or you can go straight into the enhanced heavy attack. Your forte heavy attack will always be available at this point if you've been following the rotation so far, so the core rotation becomes intro into skill 1, deplete all 4 electromagnetic blasts the way it's most practical for you, into skill 2, into forte. Echo and ultimate have a bit more flexibility to them, so let's look at a couple of options. The safest timing for the ultimate is right after skill 1, so that you're guaranteed to benefit from the 15% crit rate buff. Make sure that the ability connects though to get both stacks of your String Master passive. Against multiple targets, I'd always cast the ultimate here because it has the largest attack radius out of all your mark applying abilities. If you want to maximize ultimate damage, you can cast it right after skill 2 instead to benefit from both passive buffs and both Void Thunder stacks. It's a bit riskier because you could get interrupted and lose the crit buff, but the ultimate snapshot, so as long as the crit buff is present the moment you press the button, it will apply to the entire thing. The last option is to cast it during your forte heavy attack, which has a long animation that leaves you vulnerable, but midway through you can go straight into your ultimate and enjoy your iframes. You'll notice that your concerto energy caps during the Forte heavy attack, so it's actually the perfect moment to end your rotation, swap to the next character, and skip the animation altogether. But then you're left with an unused Echo skill. So what you can do, if you're using Tempest Mephis, is use him right as skill 2 lands to break out of the animation lock and get some good damage in before your Forte heavy attack. Tempest Mephis also buffs heavy attack damage, which is a nice little extra. And did you know that transformation echoes grant 50% damage reduction throughout the entire transformation? Combined with a turtle buff from your support, you can even face tank up to 3 hits for 0 incoming damage if you really need to. So while not as good as iframes, transformations aren't all that bad to use within your rotation. If you ever find yourself falling just short on Concerto or Forte gauge due to attacks missing their target, and also as a general failsafe, you can add a single 4th basic attack right after Yinlin's intro to make the rotation even smoother. If all of that was a bit much, let me show you the rotation I use for pretty much every use case, just so that I can turn off my brain and focus more on the fight. If you want to swap during any of this for some warm-up combos on any other unit, you can do so either right after the intro or right after skill 2. Do let me know what works best for you in terms of rotations, but with that out of the way, we can finally talk about other stuff. So let's assume we've come to terms with the fact that Yinlin is best played as a burst and then mostly off-field DPS if we want to capitalize on her strengths. In that case, there's a choice to make between Moonlit Clouds and Void Thunder. The question we're asking here really is if an additional 22% attack and 12% damage on the main DPS is enough to justify a 40% electro damage loss on Yinlin herself. With our sub-DPS options thus far, the answer has overwhelmingly been yes, because most are held back by 4-star stat lines and lower base attack, making Moonlit a much better option on them for overall team damage. Yinlin is really the first sub-DPS with a 5-star stat line and a completely broken signature weapon to boot, so it should at least be much closer. And it is in fact very close. With a lot of asterisks attached that we'll get into, the CN team that's behind all the big guides on Bilibili concludes that Moonlit is marginally better than Void Thunder. But we need to consider a few things here. First being availability. The best echoes are the ones that are available to you, so pick what you have and pick what's easier to farm, knowing that either way there's not a big difference, at least for now. Secondly, pick what's more fun for you. You prefer the bird over the Mephis or the other way around, then that's enough reason already. Thirdly, this comparison only considers single target damage, which is very unfair given that Yinlin's power level goes up in proportion to the number of targets on the field. And lastly, to reach the calculated Moonlit ceiling, you'd have to play Kalcharo flawlessly, meaning 3 Death Messengers every single rotation, which is unrealistic to say the least. That, and if you're not playing Kalcharo to begin with, then Void Thunder is 100% better, as Kalcharo is currently the only unit that makes the most of Yinlin's outro. With all of that in mind, I'd say that Void Thunder is the better choice for now, plus it's much easier to grind monsters in the overworld with this set, so that's an extra perk. If we ever get another Electro main DPS that would like Yinlin in their team that is also more consistent than Kalcharo and deals substantially more damage than him, the value of Moonlit Clouds will skyrocket at that point. But you can always swap around gear for free, so we can revisit this discussion once the time comes. You'll want the bird as your active echo if you go Moonlit, and Tempest is the best option we have right now for Void Thunder. For main stats, you'll ideally want crit damage if you're using a crit rate weapon. In all other cases, you'll want crit rate on your 4 cost, electro damage on your 3 cost, and attack percent on your 1 cost echoes. For substats, we need around 140% energy regen, then double crit, attack percent, then skill damage bonus, flat attack, and then liberation damage bonus, in this order. If you can't meet the energy requirements, you can choose an energy regen 3 cost echo to bridge the gap for now. To be mindful of your resources, focus on leveling her Forte circuit, liberation, and skill. Basics and intro contribute very little to your overall damage, so you can leave them unleveled or come back for them later down the line. As for weapons, the signature weapon towers over everything else. Not only is it completely busted, but the next best option, Cosmic Ripples, does very little for Yinlin's kit in terms of its passive. Still a good stat stick though. Battle Pass Rectifier is a really good idea if you have neither of the 5-star weapons, followed by Jinzhou Keeper. The craftable 4-star weapon gives energy regen, so the best completely free-to-play weapon is actually the 3-star weapon, Rectifier of Night. As for the value of Yinlin's Resonance Chain, her S1 increases the damage of her 2 skill casts for a 5% DPS increase. Her S2 is mostly quality of life and allows her to cut her rotation even shorter, but it's hard to calculate how impactful this one really is. I think the rotation we established is already quite self-sufficient and doesn't need any more Forte generation. Her S3 bumps up the multiplier of her off-field lightning. Her S4 gives an attack buff to the entire team with pretty much 100% uptime. Her S5 increases her ultimate damage. and her S6 adds even more powerful lightning strikes for up to 4 basic attacks per rotation. A C6 Yinlin deals a little bit more than twice the damage of C0. Regarding team building, you have your standard support options, and the obvious choice is to pair her up with Kalcharo in a hypercarry team, as she elevates him to new heights. If you don't have Kalcharo, then Yuanwu is the only other hypercarry option that makes at least partial use of Yinlin's ultra buff. If you're open to quick swapping, you get a few more options with units like Havoc Rover, Encore, Sanhua, and Danjin. For specific team combinations, it's best to look up dedicated team synergy and team rotation guides, so let this be just a general overview for now. That concludes this guide. If you've made it this far, thanks for sticking around, and if any of this has been helpful, please subscribe to my channel for more guides like these, and let me know what you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.